Good day, mates. My name is Mordecai. In light of what Pete did to my door last time, the administrator decided to have me transferred to one of the Institute's remote research facilities, allegedly out in the wilderness. It's okay, I've got my familiar Aquata for company for the moment, and he does sometimes strike up an interesting conversation. I am going to miss ye olde projector though, although you're here for a narration of an RPG horror story, so I should probably do that. As a potential DM for a campaign, a phrase that I have heard is that no plan survives contact with the players, as a kind of inspirational quote for learning how to improvise well as a DM. However, something that is just as important is the ability to prepare for each upcoming session so that improvisation can act as a supplement in the event that the player characters pursue their own goals as part of the narrative. And in the event that a DM is really good at improvisation, they can keep actual preparation down to a minimum and still pull out a fantastic experience for the table. However, there is a distinct difference between good improvisation and bad improvisation. Like any skill, it can be improved over time. However, bad improvisation can also be mitigated with good preparation. And that brings us to the horror story we shall delve into. Before we begin with the story, if you like my content and want to help support the channel, be sure to subscribe and maybe give the video a like. Every bit of support is highly appreciated. Thank you sincerely, and with that, we shall get on to reading the story. Let's delve into the often terrifying world of r/RPG horror stories. Today's narrative is titled The DM That Refused to Prep Sessions and Would Just Make Things Up to Eat Session Time, and is written by user Ryan X1bin. There is a key recommendation to upcoming DMs that I think a lot of people misinterpret. The suggestion to learn to improvise is a great one, because as all DMs will know, your party will eventually surprise you and venture into a direction you did not expect. This is advice that any DM should follow, or they're forced to relegate to the railroad when the party takes the alternate route. But some people think that you should only improvise and make bare bones preparation. And maybe there are some really good DMs out there that have the ability to do that. But for most people, prep is absolutely key to making a good game. And this story, to me, represents why. I joined a homebrewed game about an empire that was currently going through political turmoil and losing foreign wars, greatly weakening it. It sounded very similar to my own game, so I joined up. I decided to play an Inquisitor-type character, trying to re-strengthen the Empire by any means necessary. If the other players happened to want to rebel, then my character could be flexible enough to think a new revolution was necessary. We start the session off with the other two party members, a ranger and a bard, hanging around a tavern as they come in to investigate a town. The bartender tells us some bandits have been raiding the town, and the local magistrate is looking for volunteers. Cool, the other party members hear this, and low on coin, decide to join up with me. After about an hour of talking and introductions, we decide to head our way over to the magistrate. When, suddenly, a nearby man grabs my character's hand and tells me to play card games with. My character refuses. He's here on business. The man is insistent. We refuse thrice, and he still won't relent, causing my character to glare at him and asked if he was intentionally interfering with Inquisitor business. The DM asks me for an intimidation roll, and after a success, the old man finally leaves us alone. We attempt to leave the bar, only to be stopped by the waitress. The waitress starts talking about how cool and powerful the party looks, and then starts blogging about her own life out of nowhere. We talk and try to leave, only for her to now offer services for gold. I can feel the bile rising in my throat. We refuse. She is insistent, and we again have to refuse several times before she finally backs off. But before we can go anywhere, the ranger suddenly has to make a constitution save for the one ale he drank 30 minutes ago, and when he fails, he goes unconscious. We then have to spend the next 10 minutes trying to wake him up. Having finally gotten outside the tavern, we come across a beggar asking for money. We refuse, considering how everyone is low on gold, and try to move on, only for the beggar to start clinging onto Ranger's leg. The ranger has to roll athletics, and when he fails, he tumbles to the ground, while the beggar continually begs for money. I have to draw my sword to get the beggar to back off. As we make our way to the magistrate, a random man on a horse suddenly attacks us. The ranger shoots him and knocks him off of his horse. The bard stabilizes him, and we demand answers for why he attacked us. The man is very nonchalant in his attitude, refusing to answer even under threat of sword. After asking him multiple times and threatening, he finally answers that he's part of some noble house and thought we were from a rival noble house. My character is incited by this, asking why he would think total random strangers he saw were from a rival house. The man just shrugs, going on and on about how he hates the rival house. I almost execute the man right there, only for us to be attacked again by another horseman. The DM telling us that this time, it's a man from that rival house. The bard casts dissonant whispers on the horse, and we tell the DM flatly, we just run away so that we don't have to deal with this. After all of these delays, we finally make it to the magistrate, only for the guard in front to ask who each of us are, and we need to give our background stories that we already said back at the tavern. As the clock finally hits the 4th hour of session time, the DM starts clapping his hands and goes, "Perfect! The session went exactly 3 hours as I wanted! See you next week, folks!" And if it wasn't obvious by now, the DM was throwing every single thing he could think of to prevent us from actually meeting the magistrate. He was throwing every single thing to eat up the session time as much as possible. Pretty annoying, but maybe he didn't have enough time to properly prepare the session? The next week is exactly the same. The magistrate greets us and tells us we have to see a lieutenant on the other side of town for details on the bandits. We just spent 3 hours getting to this guy, and he tells us we have to go see someone else. The bard asks why in the world he wouldn't have information on the bandits, and the magistrate shrugs and says it's not his position to know military affairs. And so, off we go to meet this lieutenant, when suddenly a freaking thunderstorm suddenly appears. The storm is so strong, resulting in extremely heavy rains with extremely powerful winds, so that partway through the town we are forced to rest in a nearby house. In the house is a granny, and we offer her 1 gold piece from each of us after explaining our situation. The granny offers us food. We decline, since we're already in her home and have our rations. When we try to sleep the night away, the granny then requests each of us to start fixing things in her house. A leaky roof, a broken cupboard, a rat hiding in a corner, a dirty cookie pan, all of which requires rolls and more time. An hour is spent in the granny's house before we can finally rest and move on. We meet the lieutenant, who, again, asks us for our backstories and why we want to help clear the bandits. He finally tells us that there are about 8 of them in a nearby forest. We go into the forest, only to be stopped by fallen trees that are now blocking our way. All 3 of us have to roll athletics checks about 5 times to clear the trees, and the DM goes into painstaking descriptions of how our characters' backs hurt and feel tired and hands being itchy if we rolled anything below a 10. The DM then tells us it's been half a day, and we need to make camp and have another long rest. We decide to forage for food, and then the DM starts listing off every single animal and vegetable he can think of. The bard tells him he just wants to find vegetables that aren't poisonous, and then he starts listing off the same things again for some reason. The ranger says he's going to hunt for animals, and again, the DM starts listing off every possible animal he can think of in the woods. The ranger has to tell him that he will literally hunt anything, and after a survival check, he runs across a rabbit. The ranger rolls to shoot with an 18, and misses. The DM tells him that the bushes, shrubs, and forest somehow made the ranger miss with an 18. 18, mind you guys, is plate armor status. Ranger has to continue chasing the rabbit, and the DM just drags this session for another 10 minutes, with several of Ranger's shots still missing until he lands a 23, which apparently was the magic number he needed to kill this rabbit. Trying to forage food and cook takes us an entire hour of session time. We finally get to do the rest, we resume our journey, and the DM says we find the bandit encampment. He starts clapping his hands again, and goes, "Wow guys, another perfect 4-hour session ending right on time. This is going really well if I do say so myself. Okay, next week I'll get these bandits some stats and find a map somewhere online for the battle." Yeah, I was done and I quit the game. I perfectly understand that tabletop role-playing isn't just finding a quest and doing a combat session. But when it takes 8 hours of forced interactions to finally just arrive at the bandits we were supposed to fight, when things are being dragged out not for the sake of enriching a world, but to eat up time, and random weather and falling trees impede the path just for the planned session time, the game loses authenticity. Please, people, a good game has both great preparation and improvisation. And that's where the story ends. Let's address the elephant in the room. The DM was showcasing the results of terrible improvisation, with the goal of each session being to have it run to a predictable schedule instead of actually having things happen. Oh sure, things were happening. None of them happened to be the actual story, just endless delays as the DM stalled for time in a misguided attempt to make up for a distinct lack of preparation. That is, unless you somehow consider the endless delays to be the material the DM actually prepared, in which case, oh no. Oh no. For me, the worst part is that it does sound and look like the world is a somewhat living, breathing world where people are out trying to live lives in a setting with competing interests. Another issue that arises from how the DM was running the game was complete overload of this improvised material that actively detracted away from the plot that was intended. The DM was adding too many vegetables to a tiny bowl of Skittles. And these weren't the kind of vegetables that help cleanse a palate. These were rotting away and making a sickening smell that would repel even the flies away from them. It was just endlessly dragging the players through the mud. And worst of all, the vast majority of the mud dragging was completely pointless and thoroughly unwanted. This brings us to another concept related to improvisation, which would have made the situation better for everyone involved. Restraint. The idea behind this being to restrain the amount of improvisation needed by doing proper preparation towards what the players should be doing under the intended plot. Or to even restrain obstacles which actively penalise the players for following said plot. One ancient cursed chess on occasion is fun. Tripping over curses every few seconds is not. It is also worth mentioning that if this issue crops up in a game, that there are options for communicating with the DM, talking about the game, that is being ran and how it is being ran. Communicating what the issues are with the people involved can help you gauge whether this is a bad DM who is genuinely trying to make a good game but is failing, from a sadistic DM who is intentionally making a bad game. And those are some of the considerations that can be taken away from this story. Thank you for watching the video. If you like my content and want to see more or wish to support the channel, please hit the subscribe button and maybe leave the video a like. Every bit of support is highly appreciated. Again, thank you for watching, and I shall see you all next time.